Hi, it's John Knight, unemployed comedian. Like all of my friends, we can't work right now. Our job requires crowds. Crowds are now illegal. So I was thinking, when I get together with my friends, we've been in the business a long time. We have stories. We tell each other weird stories, funny stories, uh, scary stories, different stories, things that have happened to us on the road. And I thought it might be interesting to bring those to you. So I'm calling this series Stories from the Road. And I thought I would start off with the first story. I call this the Grandpa's story. Now, Grandpa's was a club in Staten Island, New York, that the reason it was called Grandpa's was one of the partners was Al Lewis. If you've ever watched the Munsters series, Al Lewis played Grandpa Munster, and somehow he became a partner. Now, once I met the real owners, I don't think Al really had much of a choice in the matter. I think it was pretty much, you're going to be a partner, and we're going to put your name on the sign. You know what I mean? So the way I got to do this club was I did a television show in West Orange, New Jersey. There was a club called Rascals, and we taped the show called Comedy on the Road, hosted by the great John Biner. If you don't know who John Biner is, look him up. The show Bizarre, one of the funniest guys. When I was a kid, I used to love watching John Biner, and here I was meeting him. We're hanging out, and we're telling stories in the green room. He was such a nice guy. That's one of the perks of doing this. But I did the show, and the owners from Grandpa's were there that night, and they watched me, and they liked me. And the guy that booked Rascals also booked Grandpa's, and he was my manager. So they kept making me offers. Hey, we like this guy John Knight. Can we get him in our room in Staten Island? He made me the offers. Now here's what you do. When a club makes you an offer, you ask other guys, have you ever done this room? And you wait for their response. The response you want to hear is, oh, what a great room. You're so lucky to be able to go in there. When I asked about Grandpa's, they would go, ugh. So it doesn't make it sound real appealing. So I kept turning it down, and I turned it down. And my manager calls me one day and he says, John, he says, they're going to make you an offer, a couple $100 more. They really want you to do the room. They really liked you from the show. Can you do the club? And I said, I really don't want to. And he said, you're making me look bad in front of people I really don't want to look bad in front of. So at that point I said, all right, I'll take the gig. So I go in and I do it. And the first night I meet the owners. Al Lewis isn't there. I don't know where he was. He might have been in the trunk of a car at the time. But I meet the owners, and it's I don't think comedy club was their priority business. I don't think it was their main business. So I meet them. Paulie, and he was the owner. And Augie was his guy that gave instructions. He was about 6'6", huge guy, and he was scary. But that was his job, to be scary. So I meet them. Augie saying, you can't sit there. You can't sit there. You couldn't sit in the room. You couldn't watch the other acts in the room. Go. You could stand there. You could stand there. So you got to stand on the steps, and you could watch from the steps, and you could watch the show going on. So I go meet the other acts. There's a local girl who was the MC, the host, and there was the middle act came from the South. He was a Southern guy. He had never worked the North before. I'm not going to say his name, but the way he was dressed, he had a little tuxedo jacket that wasn't big enough. It just came down to his waist, and he had a bolo tie, and he had this red hair, and it was high, and it bounced when he walked. It was bouncy hair, and the girl says to him, how would you like to be introduced? And he says, he's the most sarcastic man in America. Now, sarcasm in the South is different than sarcasm in the North. Basically, sarcasm doesn't exist in the South. But this was his intro. So she says to him again, she says, how would you like to be introduced? He says, he pulls his little lapels on his little tuxedo jacket and says, he's the most sarcastic man in America. She says, all right. Staten Island, New York. Guy's never been in the North before. Now, I should preface this by saying he's supposed to do 25 minutes because that's important to the story. So she introduces him, the most sarcastic man in America. When he walks to the stage, the whole crowd says, yeah, right. So they just tear him apart. They tear his ass out. And at 15 minutes, he says, thank you, good night. And he runs out the side door. I don't think we will ever see him again. I don't expect him to show up the rest of the weekend. It was a Thursday night. We're supposed to do 2 shows Friday, 2 Saturday, 1 Sunday. This was Thursday night. He's gone. So I'm on my way to the stage. I'm being introduced. And Augie comes over to me and he says, John, do 45 minutes. Now, the way he says it doesn't sound so much like instructions as it does a command. So at that point, I'm thinking, if I'm about to get a standing ovation, but I have to go to 46 minutes, at 45 minutes, I'm just going to say, that's all the time I have, and leave, because I don't want to be hurt. So I do the show, I get off stage, Paulie's sitting at a table, he says, John, sit down. So I sit across from him because that's what you do. And he says, I want to ask you something. I said, what do you want to ask? He says, how much time did you do? I said, I did 45 minutes. He says, I'm going to ask you again. How much time did you do? I said, I did 45 minutes. Now, at this point, I'm starting to think I should have run out the side door, right? So now, Paulie looks at me and says, I'm going to ask you one more fucking time. He says, I'm looking at my watch. My show's 10 minutes short. How much fucking time did you do? And at that point, Augie leans in, saves my life. He says, Paulie. He says, John did his time. He says, that other asshole only did 15 minutes and he ran out the side door. And Paulie looked at me and says, what I'm paying you, do your fucking time. So that's my story for tonight. We will have many more to share with you in the weeks to come. Thank you. Stay safe.